We are back again with John Kempf, and we are diving this time into agronomy. John, what was it that sparked that yesterday that had you coming back and being like, let's keep going, let's talk about agronomy?
Well, part of the spark, Matt, thanks for having me back. But part of the spark is you're just a fun guy to talk to. You know that, right? Yeah.
Well, I appreciate
And
that.
the other spark was just um, being in the field, talking to growers. I've looked at a lot of soil and plant analysis recently. I've had some in-depth conversations with various growers about what they're doing, what's happening, what's going on. And necessarily our work here at Advancing Eco Agriculture, we tend to do a quite a deep dive into understanding the interactions of various minerals and what they contribute specifically to plant immune systems. So understanding molybdenum and selenium and iodine and zinc and boron and all the ways that they contribute to plant immune systems, how to balance them to achieve disease and insect resistance, those are very important conversations with very big economic benefits for growers. Like it's if you can improve the boron levels of a crop and reduce insecticide requirements by 80%, there's a significant economic savings there and a significant improvement in crop performance. So that's been the basis of our work. And we have a lot of followers who listen to the podcast and people who listen to our webinars and take that information and go do their own thing that don't work with us directly, which is awesome. That's exactly why we put that content, that information out there to freely share it so that other people can benefit from it. But what has been emerging is the realization that there are growers who are soil and plant nerds like we are, and I mean that in the best use of that word, that they really dive deeply into understanding these topics. And in some cases, some of these growers are really missing some very foundational pieces that if it doesn't matter how deep you go, it doesn't matter how much you obsess over some of these I'm hesitant to call them secondary details because they're important, but there are some foundational pieces that have to be addressed. And I think there's a couple that are on the top of my mind right now, just based on recent experiences over the last couple of weeks. And one of them is the foundational primacy and primal requirement for abundant levels of available calcium. And if you don't have if you focus on addressing boron and all these various trace minerals and you don't provide enough calcium, it's like trying to paddle a canoe up a river that's 4 inches deep. There's no, yes, you can do it, but it's an awful lot of work for very little gain. And um, and so I'll talk about calcium for just a moment, and that is we have um, for quite some time, based on William Albrecht's work, people have focused on balancing mineral ratios, nutrient ratios as a percent of base saturation of cations, targeting 70 to 75% base saturation calcium, 12 to 16% magnesium, 3 to 5% potassium. And those ratios work well for the middle of the spectrum of CEC ranges. If you have CECs between 10 and let's say 20 or maybe up to 25, those are awesome. Go for it. But if you're below 10 or above 25, you need to throw those desired values in the trash can and start over. And the ratios are as important as ever. You still need so let's for I think the upper end of that ratio. I mean, there are growers that have extremely heavy clay soils that are above 25 CEC, but they're a distinct minority. There are many more growers who have very light sandy soils, who have less than 10 CEC. And for those light sandy soils, we need to look at these nutrients not just as a ratio, but also as a function of minimal levels, minimal desired value, so that we know, take potassium, for example. Um, the minimum level of potassium that needs to be in a soil in order to have good grain fill, good fruit fill. Our target is 125 parts per million. We don't want to fall below that threshold. And so when we have a soil that has a 10 C, or let's say it has a 5 or a 6 CEC, in order to maintain 125 parts per million, you might be looking at 6 to 7% base saturation, or maybe even more than that if the soil becomes light enough. And so we need to think about magnesium and calcium in the exact same way. There needs to be a blend of an optimal ratio plus minimal balance. So what this means, our here are the thresholds that I work with. I'm going to give them for four nutrients, one of them being the trace mineral boron as a case of reference point as well. So the ratios that we look for are minimal thresholds, 1,000 part per million calcium, 150 magnesium, 125 potassium, 3 parts per million boron. And there's this ratio between calcium and boron of 1,000 to 3. And here's the deal. I have encountered I've encountered this for years. Um, Growers and agronomists who are very well meaning and who have been very well informed, suggesting that 70 to 75% base saturation calcium is adequate with soil that has a CEC or 5 or 6, and that represents 5 to 600 parts per million. It does not work. Those plants do not perform well. We do not see good disease and insect resistance. We never see adequate calcium levels showing up in plant sap in those cases. Doesn't matter how much boron you apply, doesn't matter that the ratios are optimal. There simply isn't enough quantity. You need a minimum baseline level of quantity available. And um, so my point is simply that when you fall below a threshold CEC of somewhere around 10, then you need to look at ratios of nutrients as ratios in part per million concentrations to each other, and you have to ignore the ratios on the CEC. You have to look at minimum threshold levels. What have you experienced or observed in this scenario?
Well, I have that sandy, silty soil. You have my brain going like crazy. So it feels like it runs out. It feels
Yep.
like we hit stop gaps in the season and
And
everything's
you
going
hit the
great.
stop gaps right when you have greatest demand.
Right, exactly. Right. When everything's fruiting and everything is at that like two-thirds point through the fruit development.
Exactly. Exactly right.
So I was just, as you were speaking to that, this is something I see in natural farmers with Korean natural farming. They talk about using a chelated calcium spray to fight blight and high humidity when calcium transport starts to slow or shut down. They use a calcium spray. And so I'm wondering in this scenario, what is the preventative and then what is the in the middle of the season reaction that farmers can take?
The preventative is 1,000 part per million of calcium in the soil that remains available through the season. And that's a key clarifier. We can come back to that in just a moment to expand on that because that is also frequently a shortfall for many growers. Um, and the the recovery, if you are in a situation where um, you don't have that level of soil calcium and you discover it in the middle of the season, you can attempt to recover to a degree with foliar sprays of calcium, which need to be chelated so that they are mobile and can move around in the plant. But um, in my opinion, it's not possible. It's possible to make an improvement in fruit quality and plant quality with calcium foliar sprays, yes, but it is never possible to achieve the same degree of quality with calcium foliar sprays as you can achieve with a soil application or having generous levels in the soil to begin with. They are a very distant second best band-aid.
I appreciate this so much. This is the nuance that I keep telling people that, we have so much one size fits all thinking in soil science. And as soon as you just start digging into it, you're like, wait a second, how much air is there in the silty sandy soil versus the loamy, soil that's really well structured? And you're like, and then you're giving numbers that, whoa, whoa, you can't give the same numbers because they've collapsed the
Right.
air whenever they do the tests. And so their numbers
Exactly.
are not even comparable. So this,
Exactly.
I talk about boundaries on our comprehension in my classes. I say we must bound ourselves to the bioregion or the soil type or to actually get clarity. Because if you're comparing Maine soil to New Mexico soil, and then being like, the numbers are just not the same here in New Mexico, and you're striving to imitate Maine, you're going
Right.
to be sad for a long time.
Well, another way of saying what you're describing, Matt, is that our thinking is limited by the parameters that are reported or the parameters that we are considering. So if we also included the parameters of soil bulk density, and if we included the parameters of water infiltration and air infiltration, like in other words, we look at a soil report that measures 20 parameters. But if we also measured an additional 20 parameters that include bulk density that say, oh, wait a minute, a part per million of 1 part per million of calcium in this soil equals 2 pounds per acre in the top 6 inches, and in that soil it only equals a half a pound per acre. It's like the realization that the quantity of minerals available is not just a reflection of part per million, it's a reflection of bulk density. It's a reflection of depth of variation of how deep plant roots go. There are, we so easily get caught in the trap of thinking that, well, we have this soil analysis that gives us these 20 different parameters, and therefore we understand how this soil is going to work. And anyone who has any level of significant experience in the agronomic field understands pretty quickly that that is a fallacy.
That's why I'm so excited about you're working with Laura Kavanaugh. You're working with all these people that are broadening that spectrum, broadening that list of distinctions. And we are getting further and further, our hands more and more around this holistic picture. That's what I'm trying to do with the RSoil database. I mean, your work and your collecting of data and analyzing of that data with all your clients or AEA, all your students, it was inspiring to me. And I'm doing, the microscope side. And for so many people, that's so much harder to pin down. But that's why you have to do it with other testing.
Right.
And in fact, we have to let it play out alongside those tests and generate more and more information so that we can gain that meaning. So this
Yeah.
this position where we allow nature to speak to us, allow creation to instruct us is such a powerful, powerful thing. You mentioned that keeping the calcium available through the season. I would love to hear about that.
Yeah, that's the magical piece that is actually very easy in from an idealistic perspective, and in some cropping systems is challenging from a practical application perspective. So um, the bottom line is that calcium, facilitating calcium absorption from soils to plants doesn't function very well when we are looking at from a calcium chemistry and an ionic calcium perspective. When I say it doesn't function very well, is yeah, you can read all the science about how it works and why it works, and but in real world practical application settings, it is dependent on almost constant ideal soil moisture levels, which isn't real world. Moisture levels fluctuate all the time, and therefore calcium availability fluctuates all the time, usually to the plant's detriment if they're dependent on that type of a system. We really need to get our heads around the fact that in healthy plant and soil ecosystems, calcium delivery to the plant is almost entirely a function of biology. It is biology, particularly bacteria and fungi and the rhizophagy endophyte cycling process that transmit calcium into the plant in significant quantities. And so we first had to think about or get our heads around the idea that in order to get a constant supply of calcium through the growing season, we need to have constant abundant biology through the growing season. And then what that means in practice is we need to think about managing our soils as if though they were a laboratory petri dish. If you're trying to propagate microbes in a laboratory petri dish, you attempt to control all the parameters as well as you know and understand them to provide an ideal environment in terms of moisture, humidity, and temperature. And we need to do the same thing for our soils. Now, it's interesting. Um, it's a bit of a sidebar, but um, the the old knowledge, the historical knowledge around calcium, says something to the effect of that. I think perhaps Don Schrieffer first reported on this in a couple of his books, Agriculture in Transition and Soil in Transition. But he described how nutrients will tend to layer out in soil um, in various various strata, if they are able to be mobile and to move through soil. And so the top strata, if I recall correctly, was potassium and then phosphorus. Then it moves on down until you have the 10th layer is calcium. And that 10th layer of calcium can be as shallow as 6 inches deep if you have a compaction zone, or it can be as deep as 18 to 24 inches deep in some soils that I've observed, which means that calcium has moved down below the root system of many of our annual plants that we're growing as crops. Now, there's a big caveat here. And the caveat is that that degree of calcium mobility and that degree of stratification is partially dependent on having poor biology. Because when you have good biology, let's say you have good fungal hyphae, two things happen. First of all, they prevent that degree of stratification. And secondly, they move things around again and they create a greater degree of uniformity throughout the entire soil profile. But then if we go to the opposite end of the spectrum, it is when we have a great deal of carbon, there is also the possibility for um, there's also the possibility for nutrients to not stratify and to hold still because there is zero biology. The soil is completely dead. I've observed a few soils like this that are so thoroughly dead, have such limited biology that when growers apply limestone, um, and we pull soil analysis at a depth of 0 to 6 inches and 6 to 12 inches and 12 to 18 inches, and we look at these different depths, all the calcium remains right in the top 6 inches. It doesn't even move down through the soil profile. Again, because there is no biology. And this is also a reflection of rainfall, and there's obviously multiple variables in play here. But the key point, I'm adding a little bit too much flavor, too many spices to this conversation, too many side points. The key point that I want to make is that we need to keep, in order for biology to function well, we need to keep soils in the same zone that our calcium is in. We need to keep our soils at optimal temperatures and at optimal moisture levels for biology. And when we do that, you have good calcium nutrition. And I'll give you, rather than this hypothetical conversation, I'll give you a good example, concrete example. I have many that I could describe, but one of our close friends and collaborators is Greg Pennyroyal from Wilson Creek Winery in Pennsylvania. Not in Pennsylvania. Yeah, he would be better off in Pennsylvania, maybe, but he's doing awesome work in California, Wilson Creek Winery outside of Temecula, California. In one of our test blocks that we were constantly conducting experiments on, there was this continual struggle to get adequate calcium supply later on in the growing season. There would be adequate calcium supply for perhaps the first 30 to 60 days of leaf development. And then calcium delivery would just fall into the tank. And we were putting on calcium in drip irrigation systems. We were foliar applying calcium, and it was very difficult to get it up to even to 9 to 1100 part per million. And our target was around 15 to 1800. Well, one of the experiments that Greg conducted was covering the vine row with, and I forget if it was an 18-inch or 24-inch wide strip of mulch. And the experiment was to experiment with different types of mulch. They were experimenting with wood chips and with hay mulch and with compost. But when they applied the mulch, regardless of what treatment it was, even on the wood chips, that following year, calcium levels jumped to 2,000, 2,200, 24 parts per million, 2,400 parts per million without applying a single drop of calcium, and they stayed up the entire growing season. The effect of keeping that soil cool, so he's in Southern California, a hot, dry desert environment. The soil was typically, prior to that, the soil was bare soil exposed to the sunlight, getting baked in the top 4 inches. And that baking in the top 4 inches meant that there was very limited biological activity in a zone that had abundant available calcium and was able to provide calcium to the crop. Even though great root systems go dozens of feet, can go dozens of feet deep or deeper. So it's not a question of, this is a crop whose root system, perennial crop, root system goes deep, but that top A horizon is still extremely important. So they covered the soil with mulch and they solved their calcium problem
That's
just like that.
incredible.
No further additions of calcium required. That is treating your soil like a laboratory petri dish, maintaining optimal moisture and optimal temperature environments. I believe if we did that on a broader scale, we would solve so many calcium deficiency problems, people would be amazed.
Yeah, it's when I look under the microscope and I look at sand, it looks like shards of glass. And so when we've got bare soils that are sandy and silty, I know the light is being carried
Right.
down through that soil profile, well, sandy profile. And I don't know how deep it goes, but I know it keeps going. And we
Oh,
use UV
it's
lights to sterilize things in our pools or in our HVAC, or, people use light to remove biology. And
well,
so
you think
just
about
covering it, Ray Archuleta, keep it covered is so powerful.
some
I
of these
I was
sand
th
crystals.
I was thinking about how you reverse the Fenton reaction. Essentially, you prevent the Fenton reaction, the gassing off the carbon, the gassing off of the nitrogen. But I hadn't thought about its effect on calcium. That is amazing. And I was originally started out in California in the Central Valley. So uh, a little bit from Temecula, a little bit of a drive, but it was 140 degrees soil when it was left
Right.
bare. 112
Yes.
degrees outside ambient, but that sun's pounding and compounding the heat on that bare soil. And folks don't, I mean, if you do composting, 140 degrees, that's, a lot of life's dying at that heat.
And it can be when it's 140 degrees at the surface, it will be 120 degrees at a depth of 4 to 6 inches, depending on what the soil composition is. And to the point you were making earlier on sandy soils, where we usually have limited calcium supply to begin with, these, if you look at sand underneath a microscope and it resembles shards of glass, well, what do we know about shards of glass? They don't just transmit light. Sometimes they scatter it, and also sometimes, depending on the angles, they magnify it. And you can have magnified light transference through the soil profile.
Yeah, and glass heats up too. We always feel
Right.
like, the window pane on the hot day on the in the car, it's hot. When you touch that soil, it is just wild. I mean, you don't want to keep your hand on it. It hurts. And then you think about the biology. It's so simple. It's so simple keeping it covered. It is the way it wants to work. So how difficult is this for some farmers to transition though? Because I know I have a wife that loves, clean lines, clean looking everything. And I know a lot of farmers, they have just been doing everything so it's clean. It's in their minds tidy at the end of the season. And now you got Ray Archuleta and you and other folks being like, no, 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 we want to keep it covered. We want to, it's like, how hard is that transition for some folks?
We started our conversation yesterday by talking about the necessity of renewing our hearts and minds. And this is similar that we need to have a renewed vision of what it means to be beautiful.
Yeah. Yeah, and then I mentioned to Ray potatoes and disturbance, and he was like, "Oh no, we can do it on top. We can cover it with mulch." Are there any difficult transitions for people that farmers who are like, "This won't work for me," that you've had success stories with like that, like potatoes?
Well, I'm actually going to come at it from the other angle. I don't have a dogmatic position on tillage. In fact, some of the healthiest soils that I have ever observed from a microbiome perspective, from a plant performance, from every dimension, were soils that were tilled occasionally.
Hmm.
Not every year, not multiple times per year, but once every 6 to 7 years. And here again, to a point that you made earlier, we cannot allow ourselves to be bound by experiences that worked well in other soils and other conditions. Now, if you go to some of the loose, sandy soil, or not sandy, but the loose soils that have very good tilt in the Dakotas, where they are very highly susceptible to wind erosion, yes, those soils should not be tilled. There is no need to till them because they naturally have such exceptional aeration and they're so susceptible to wind erosion that it is not ideal to till those soils. You go to other soils that do not naturally have those characteristics. They have different clay formations. They have perhaps a very high clay content. And particularly if you have a high clay content and the combination of a high clay content and a low rainfall environment, what will usually happen is that, let's say those soils are acidic and you need to apply limestone. The calcium will concentrate in the upper part of the soil profile. The carbon residues will concentrate, and you can gradually build soil tilth down over a period of time. Or if you do it wisely and carefully and you till as needed, maybe early on it's once every 2 years and then once every 5 to 7 years, whatever. In other words, I'm not on the bandwagon of demonizing tillage. I think tillage can be a very valuable and useful tool if it is used like that in wisely in the right context, in the right setting. And so within that context, the question that we should be asking is, what are the potato growing and harvesting systems that we should be developing for different types of soils? They probably should be very different in sandy soils or in clay soils. Or maybe we should be asking the question, why are we growing potatoes in high clay content soils in the first place?
Awesome. Yeah, shifting our perspective is so key on so much of this. I have so many students I've that are from diverse locations, and some of them, because I teach homesteading and permaculture, some of them are growing in places no one would ever grow food, and I have to ground them and help them through like recognizing it. And some people are below overflowing mines, abandoned mines, and the tillings are melting into lakes right by their house. And I have to tell them, they're like, but I want to do no till. And it's like, no, if there's contamination in your soil and we know the remediation protocols, you're going to mix it in because you want the medicine to meet
Exactly.
the problem. And
Exactly.
so it's really that being just pragmatic. If you have a deficiency that is so severe that it requires, deep intervention, that's what you need. And it's really about the proof. It's about the end result. And contextually, that can be so different. I mean, I've got people in Australia with hyper acidic soils and, I'm telling them, yeah, make the hot alkaline oxidized compost because that's going to bring you closer up out of the danger zone. They're 5.3 in high aluminum
Mhm.
soils and they're
Yep.
gardening.
Yep.
So it's all contextual. And
It,
so much of your work has helped me ground into that.
I think, it's easier. Um, how can I say this kindly? It's easier for us to see the faults of others than it is to see our own.
Hmm.
And also, usually it is the faults of others that bother us the most that we have the greatest personal challenge with. And the reason I bring this up is because if you want to identify a certain group of people and associate them with a label in this agricultural movement, various movements, let's call it organic agriculture, um, or conservation agriculture, or no-till agriculture. Um, all of these various groups, there is this prevailing trend to hold the perspective that we have figured it out, and if you don't agree with us, you are wrong. And that is called dogma.
Hubris.
That is called dogma, that this practice is correct and that practice is wrong. And it's black and white, and there is no spectrum in between the two. We have this conversation around tillage. Tillage is universally right or universally wrong, or the use of glyphosate, or grazing livestock, or the list goes on and on. The most, I think, the thing that most limits us as humans is it's so easy to become dogmatic. So easy to become, because it's easy being dogmatic. I read this quote. I've read it many times over the years, and it popped up again for me just recently. I think it's Carl Jung who said that people don't like to expend the effort to think, and so they judge. It's easier to be judgmental than it is to think. And I
Because you might be
think,
wrong if you think.
yeah, well, I think all of us would be, the entire world, and for us as a society, would all be better served if we were less judgmental, less dogmatic, and we can be gracious enough. It's being gracious enough to say to the other person, you know what? I have a different perspective from yours. Here's why my perspective is different. Why is your perspective different? What are the things that we agree on? What are the things that we disagree on? We might walk away from a conversation satisfied that our perspective is still the most relevant one in our context, or we might be open to new ideas. Now, that requires thought, it requires conscious effort. And it's probably not something that we can engage in constantly all the time. But I think to the degree that we can engage in that exercise, that level of openness will determine the degree of our effectiveness in facilitating change in our own lives and the lives of the people around us that we seek to influence.
Absolutely. And I believe it's also a fundamental sign of respect. You let people say their piece, you let people have their piece, and and your perspective is yours, and it's just as valid, and we can always change. But man, I I I have only grown through embracing the humility, avoiding hubris, being ready to be wrong to in order to be righter.
Well, um, experience, it would be nice if experience was associated with age, but we know that that's not always true. There are young people who are wise beyond their years because they have sought to become deeply informed. They have sought to learn from the experience of others. There are older people who have a lot of life experience, but they haven't informed that life experience by other people's life experiences. Um, I suppose the thing that I'm only attempting to say is that, responding to what you just said a little bit ago, I don't I don't necessarily believe that all individuals' points of view hold equal value, um, because some people's opinions are much more considered than others and
Hmm,
much more developed than
that's true.
others. And that is
I agree
not
with that.
associated with age. That's not associated with age. But I will say, I do believe that every person knows something that I would benefit from knowing. And I love trying to figure out what that is for various for people I meet.
Absolutely. I love that.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's why it's so wonderful to have your perspective in our soil, in my books, and in the world, influencing so many people because this is such a powerful perspective. It allows us to grow and it keeps off the blinders because right now we got a lot of work to do, but we also have an incredible amount of knowledge and wisdom that you've gained through your experience and shared with so many people. AEA, where can folks learn more from you guys?
Um, Check out our website, advancingecoag.com. Please call us. Our team is always happy to talk to people. Our number is readily available. It's 800-495-6603. And we put out so many resources. Advancing Eco Agriculture has greatly expanded their blog. So I've had my personal blog in the past at johnkempf.com, but I would really recommend people subscribe to the Advancing Eco Ag blog because that's going to be quite a amazing wave of new content and information coming out there. And the podcast, of course, Regenerative Agriculture podcast. And also, um, perhaps the best of all is there was an announcement made. We haven't really talked about this formally and publicly widely yet, but the Regrarians platform that Darren Dougherty has been a part of is migrating to Kind Harvest. So kindharvest.ag is social network for farmers and growers, just generally and broadly. We're not limiting it, but because of I founded it, and because of that presence and Darren's presence, it is largely regenerative and organic growers at this point. And the conversations, the dialogue that you can have there, you will not find that quality of conversation anywhere else. It is the best platform to engage in thoughtful conversations about how to interpret soil analysis and how to manage different situations. It's an incredible community.
It is such a joy to hear that you are working with Darren. Darren has been a mentor of me, like a just like a fatherly figure for me for since I mean to the past 10 years. He's been my first book. He helped me make the second edition on it and fix things in it. He also came out of the permaculture world where I came out from, and he his perspective is so pragmatic. His regenerative ag perspective is so well, it's like, what is the bottom line? You're making more money, the health of the land's improved, you're holding more water. It's such brass tacks. And then he has such a long history and record of successes where he's showing the transformation of the farms. And for me, when I learned about his work in permaculture, it was like, this is the person that's taken all this knowledge and then created a professional platform and system. And I mean, he's doing everything from, orchards and ranches and all these permutations all over the world that are funky, that are, highly creative. And then, man, you are, what I've seen, you've helped all these conventional farmers transition and transform all these organic farmers, figure out how to be regenerative. And for me, you two were these two worlds, and to see you all combine, it's like a cusp moment in history for me. This is a huge thing. You two are two of my greatest mentors, and you got between you, you guys cover everything that needs to happen right now, from the homestead all the way to the big garden, to the market garden, to the farmer, to even, fixing the wildlands. And it's so I'm just so inspired that you guys have combined. I think everyone should be on Kind Harvest. I'm on Kind Harvest. I've been on there since the beginning.
Thank you,
And
Matt.
yeah, I love it. Harriet Mella is on there as well.
Yep.
There's all stars on this. And the conversations in Regrarians, the conversations in Kind Harvest, I am one of those fly on the walls where I'm just watching, I'm just listening, I'm always there. And yeah, don't miss out on that. And your wonderful courses. I mean, just even your free courses, folks, if you don't know about the free and inexpensive courses that John Kempf offers, please start with the plant health pyramid, and it'll flip your lid, and you'll want to watch them all.
Flip your lid. I like that.
That
No,
comes from
thank
my
you. Thank
dad.
you for
That's
that
an Iowa
endorsement, Matt.
thing.
No, thank you for that endorsement. I think it's worth mentioning and commenting. Do we need another social network? Why did I start Kind Harvest? I participated in an online course as a student where there was a private Facebook group and there was a private discourse channel. And I observed people in these different settings behaving completely differently. People who would respond with terse single sentence answers to the point of almost being considered rude from the context of not being able and not conveying emotion well. Um, Folks who would provide very abbreviated answers on Facebook would provide these thoughtful, considered, multiple paragraph long answers on the private discussion forum. And I realized that each of these platforms carries their own inherent ethos of what is considered acceptable behavior and what is considered the best way to show up in the world. And so I started Kind Harvest, and I included the word kind in the name with very consciously, deliberately, and intentionally. And um, with the intent of creating a platform where we can have thoughtful, engaged conversations because we know that each one of us needs to be supported by a community. We need our own peer network of people that support us, that can give us critical feedback, that can help us make more informed decisions. And in a perfect world, we would have some element of that, perhaps even a large element of that in person, with personal relationships, with people who are in geographic proximity to us. But for many of us, that simply isn't true in today's world. And there needs to be this online facilitation for that. And so that was part of the inspiration for Kind Harvest. And we put together these rules of engagement. The first one is simply be kind. And every post and every comment has the ability to be flagged by users for review by the moderators. How many posts or comments do you think have been flagged for review in the last 24 months that we've been active? Not one. Zero. And that when you get there and you look at these, I mean, some of these discussion forums have hundreds of posts in them talking about a specific topic, like cover crops and orchards, for example. It's one of my favorite ones. And there's this incredibly engaged conversation where people are being kind to each other and engaging with each other in the most beautiful way.
I love that. I took a cue from you and I started this Circle is a white label social media system, and you literally can connect it to any course and name it whatever you want, have as many people as you want. And I create little social groups on that for each one of my courses. And people are so kind, so helpful. They act like they would as if we were in person. There's that same warmth. And the social media, there's something there's something broken over there. And when we create these private groups, when we set the tone, the classroom environment, amazing things happen. So folks, check out Kind Harvest. It's kindharvest.ag.
Yes.
Excellent.
Thank you, Matt.
Thank you, John. Always a pleasure. That was
I have
perfect.
so much fun with you every time we talk.
That was great. That was absolutely awesome. Yeah, D Darren is he is so Darren was taught by Bill Mollison. Jeff Lawton was taught by Bill Mollison. Jeff Lawton carried on the PDC just like Jeff did since Bill did since the 90s. So it's like very much the same. And a lot of it's like colloquialism stuff. He's like, just put the compost in the hole and cover it, and it's good, mate. And you're like, you know. And Darren instead was like, well, I'm going to study keyline now, and I'm going to go listen to all the ranchers because he was the local organic produce delivery boy and then the business. And so he was talking to the farmers and getting the intel from all the organic farmers, what was wrong, what was right. And he became the communicator between all of them because he would see the farms doing it right. And his pragmatism, his professionalism, his desire to help like real farmers, That's I shifted everything I did in permaculture to that and
Right.
set it off of his standard. So it's so
Well,
awesome you guys are working together.
yeah, I think the key word is pragmatism and being open to learn from multiple perspectives. And yeah, one of my, I think the second to most recent podcast interview that we released, Darren visited here at my home for 2 days and we sat across the table from each other and recorded about a 2 hour long session. It's pretty magical.
That is magical. The first time I met him, I was at an event and he spoke for 2 hours. I sat through the whole thing, and his wife was there, and they're hilarious together.
Yep.
And and at the end of it, I just stuck with him for the whole next 3 days. Wherever he did, I ate all of my meals with him. I went to all his talks and just we just hung out the entire time because I learned so much.
Yep. Yep. Yeah. Well, um,
To be continued.
to be continued. On a different note, hang on to your hat for an announcement. I don't believe anything until it happens anymore,
Hmm.
but my instinct is, or maybe I should say my hope is that we see an announcement for Secretary of Ag sometime this afternoon between 2 and 4 p.m. is my guess. It could be wrong. It might not be until next week, but I think we're pretty close. And I think my hunch is it's going to be really good news. So keep your eyes peeled for that.
Thank you. I'm so excited for it. Thank you so much for all your involvement and work in this.
Yeah, you're welcome. All right. Thanks, Matt. Talk soon.
All right, John, have a great one.